World War II was humanity's darkest hour, a global conflict that tested the limits of human courage, sacrifice, and resilience. While millions fought bravely across every theatre of war, some individuals stood out with acts of valour so extraordinary that they transcended the chaos of battle and became legends. Today we're counting down the top 10 bravest fighters of World War II, men and women whose courage changed the course of history. From the beaches of Normandy to the skies over Europe, from the Pacific Islands to the frozen Eastern Front, these warriors embodied the very definition of bravery. Let's begin. At number 10 we have Audie Murphy, America's most decorated soldier of World War II. Born into poverty in Texas in 1925, Murphy was just 5 feet 5 inches tall and weighed barely 110 pounds when he tried to enlist. Rejected by the Marines and paratroopers for being too small, he finally joined the Army in 1942 at age 17. But what Murphy lacked in size, he made up for in sheer courage. By the end of the war, he had earned every combat award for valour available from the US Army, as well as French and Belgian decorations, 33 awards in total, including the Medal of Honour. His most famous act of bravery occurred on January 26, 1945, near Holtzwihr, France. When German forces launched a major counterattack with tanks and infantry, Murphy's position was being overrun. With his men retreating, Murphy climbed onto a burning tank destroyer, which could explode at any moment, and used its .50 caliber machine gun to hold off an entire company of German soldiers for over an hour. Despite being wounded and the vehicle burning beneath him, Murphy killed or wounded 50 enemy soldiers, single-handedly stopping the German advance. When his ammunition was finally exhausted and the Germans were just 10 yards away, he rallied his men for a counterattack that drove the enemy back. For this incredible act of heroism, Murphy received the Medal of Honour. After the war, he became a successful actor in Hollywood, appearing in over 40 films, but the war never truly left him. He suffered from what we now call PTSD and became an advocate for veterans' mental health. Audie Murphy showed the world that true courage has nothing to do with size and everything to do with heart. At number 9 we have Lyudmila Pavlichenko, the deadliest female sniper in history. Born in Ukraine in 1916, Pavlichenko was a history student at Kiev University when Germany invaded the Soviet Union in 1941. Despite being a civilian, she volunteered for the Red Army and was assigned to the 25th Rifle Division as a sniper. In a male-dominated military, Pavlichenko had to prove herself immediately, and prove herself she did with deadly precision. Over the next 2.5 years, Pavlichenko recorded 309 confirmed kills, including 36 enemy snipers, an extraordinarily dangerous specialty within her already deadly profession. Sniper duels were psychological warfare at its most intense. Sometimes she would wait days in the same position for a single shot. Her most challenging engagement was against a skilled German sniper who had killed many Soviet soldiers. For 2 days they hunted each other across the ruins of Sevastopol. Finally, Pavlichenko outsmarted him with a ruse and eliminated the threat. After being seriously wounded by mortar fire, Pavlichenko was pulled from combat and sent on a goodwill tour to rally support among the Allies. She became the first Soviet citizen received at the White House, where she befriended Eleanor Roosevelt and toured America, challenging the perception that women couldn't be effective in combat. When male reporters asked trivial questions about her uniform and makeup, she famously replied, "Gentlemen, I am 25 years old, and I have killed 309 fascist invaders by now. Don't you think, gentlemen, that you have been hiding behind my back for too long?" Lady Death, as she was known, proved that courage and deadly skill know no gender. At number 8 is Captain Charles Upham of New Zealand, one of only 3 people to ever receive the Victoria Cross twice, and the only combat soldier to achieve this distinction. The Victoria Cross is the highest military decoration for valour in the British Commonwealth, and receiving it once is extraordinarily rare. Receiving it twice is nearly impossible. Upham was a quiet sheep farmer from New Zealand who enlisted when war broke out. His fellow soldiers described him as reserved and humble, but in combat he transformed into a fearless warrior. Upham earned his first Victoria Cross in Crete in May 1941 during the German airborne invasion. Despite being wounded multiple times, Upham destroyed several German machine gun positions, attacked and destroyed a German troop carrier, and carried wounded men to safety under heavy fire. At one point, despite having his arm in a sling from a previous wound, he advanced on an enemy position armed only with grenades. His commanding officer tried to order him to rest, but Upham refused, saying his men needed him. Over the course of the 9-day battle, he was everywhere the fighting was fiercest, inspiring his men through personal example. Upham's second Victoria Cross came in July 1942 at Ruvaisat Ridge in Egypt. Again wounded multiple times, including a shattered arm, Upham continued fighting. He destroyed a German tank and several vehicles, captured numerous enemy soldiers, and inspired his men despite being in excruciating pain. He was finally captured by the Germans and spent the rest of the war in prisoner-of-war camps, where he made multiple escape attempts. After the war, Upham returned to his quiet life as a farmer, rarely speaking about his achievements. He was so humble that he reportedly kept his Victoria Cross medals in a biscuit tin. Charles Upham proved that true heroes don't seek glory. They simply do what must be done. At number 7 we have Witold Pilecki, a man whose bravery is so extraordinary that it seems almost fictional. This Polish resistance fighter voluntarily got himself imprisoned in Auschwitz concentration camp to gather intelligence and organize resistance from within. Let that sink in. He volunteered to enter hell on earth. In 1940, the Polish underground needed information about what was really happening at Auschwitz. The Nazis had taken over this former Polish army barracks, but rumours suggested something far more sinister was occurring there. Pilecki volunteered for an almost suicidal mission: allow himself to be captured during a Nazi roundup, get sent to Auschwitz, survive, organize resistance, gather intelligence, and somehow get the information out. In September 1940, he deliberately walked into a German street roundup in Warsaw using false identity papers. He was sent to Auschwitz, where he was assigned number 4859. For the next 2.5 years, Pilecki survived the unimaginable horrors of the camp while secretly organizing a resistance network of nearly 1,000 inmates. They distributed extra food, clothing, and medicine to keep prisoners alive, planned escapes, gathered intelligence, and even prepared for a potential uprising. Pilecki compiled detailed reports about the mass murder taking place, including the gas chambers, and smuggled them out through released prisoners and underground contacts. His reports were among the first detailed accounts of the Holocaust to reach the Western Allies, though tragically they were largely ignored or disbelieved. In April 1943, after gathering enough intelligence and realizing the Allies would not support an uprising, Pilecki escaped during a night shift at a bakery outside the camp. He fled to Warsaw and continued his resistance work. After surviving Auschwitz, he fought in the Warsaw Uprising in 1944, was captured again, and survived another POW camp. Tragically, his story doesn't end well. After the war, Communist Poland viewed him as a threat due to his loyalty to the Polish government in exile. He was arrested, tortured, subjected to a show trial, and executed in 1948. Witold Pilecki voluntarily entered Auschwitz and survived, only to be killed by his own countrymen. His courage remains one of history's most remarkable, yet underappreciated stories. At number 6 is Desmond Doss, the only conscientious objector to receive the Medal of Honor during World War II, and one of the most inspiring stories of courage without a weapon. Doss was a Seventh-day Adventist who believed that killing was wrong, but also believed that serving his country and saving lives was his duty. When he enlisted in the army as a medic in 1942, his fellow soldiers and commanding officers didn't know what to make of him. Here was a man who refused to even touch a rifle, let alone fire one. Many called him a coward. Some threatened him. His own captain tried to have him discharged as mentally unfit. But Doss persevered, completing his training and deploying to the Pacific Theatre with the 77th Infantry Division. In the battles of Guam and Leyte, Doss proved his courage, earning the respect of men who had once mocked him. But his defining moment came at Hacksaw Ridge on Okinawa in May 1945. Hacksaw Ridge was a 400-foot cliff that American forces had to scale under murderous Japanese fire. The fighting was so intense that casualties were catastrophic. When Doss's unit finally captured the top of the ridge, they came under devastating counterattack. The order came to retreat. But Doss stayed behind. Alone on that hellish ridge, under constant fire, he began dragging wounded men to the edge of the cliff and lowering them down one by one using a rope sling. Each time he saved a man, he prayed, "Dear God, let me get just one more." For 5 hours, Doss worked alone, exposed to enemy fire, explosions and shrapnel. He treated wounds, pulled men from exposed positions, and lowered them to safety. When the count was made, Doss had saved 75 men, though he modestly insisted it was closer to 50. Over the following weeks, Doss continued to display extraordinary courage, at one point shielding a wounded soldier with his own body from a grenade blast. He was eventually wounded himself by a grenade and a sniper's bullet, but even while being carried on a stretcher, he insisted that another more severely wounded man take his place. Desmond Doss proved that the greatest courage isn't always found in those who take lives, but sometimes in those who risk everything to save them. At number 5 is Group Captain Sir Douglas Bader, the legless fighter ace who refused to let a catastrophic injury end his career, and went on to become one of Britain's most successful fighter pilots. Bader's story begins with tragedy. In 1931, while performing aerobatics at an airshow, the 21-year-old pilot crashed, losing both his legs, one above the knee, the other below. Most people would consider this a career-ending injury, especially for a pilot. But Bader wasn't most people after learning to walk on prosthetic legs and walk convincingly enough to fool observers. He fought to remain in the RAF. Initially medically retired, he persisted for years, and when war broke out in 1939, the desperate need for experienced pilots gave him a second chance. In 1940, Bader returned to active duty and was soon commanding fighter squadrons during the Battle of Britain. Flying a Spitfire, Bader proved that his prosthetic legs were not a handicap. In fact, they may have been an advantage in certain situations. During high G maneuvers that caused other pilots to black out from blood draining from their brains, Bader's lack of real legs meant he had no such problem. He developed controversial big-wing tactics, assembling large formations of fighters to overwhelm the enemy, and became an ace, officially credited with 22 aerial victories, with many more probable. His aggression and fearlessness made him a legend among pilots and a hero to the British public. In August 1941, Bader's Spitfire collided with a German fighter over France. He was forced to bail out, but one of his prosthetic legs became trapped in the cockpit. He had to detach it to escape, parachuting to Earth with only one artificial leg. The Germans captured him, and when they discovered he was the famous legless ace, they were so impressed that they allowed the RAF to drop a replacement leg through the front lines. As a POW, Bader was so disruptive, making multiple escape attempts, that the Germans eventually sent him to Colditz Castle, the high-security prison for incorrigible escapers. Even there he continued to cause problems for his captors until the war's end. Douglas Bader proved that physical limitations are often just mental barriers. Where others saw an insurmountable disability, he saw merely an inconvenience. His courage wasn't just in combat, it was in refusing to accept what the world told him was impossible. At number 4 is Gunnery Sergeant John Basilone, the only enlisted Marine in World War II to receive both the Medal of Honor and the Navy Cross. Basilone was a machine gunner from New Jersey who became a legend in 2 of the Pacific War's most brutal battles. Basilone's defining moment came at Guadalcanal in October 1942. The Marines were desperately defending Henderson Field, the crucial airfield that whoever controlled would control the South Pacific. For 3 days and nights, Japanese forces launched wave after wave of attacks against the Marine positions. On the night of October 24th, 25, Basilone's machine gun section faced the full fury of a Japanese regiment, 3,000 enemy soldiers attacking their position. As the battle raged through the darkness, Basilone's guns were the key to holding the line. When his ammunition ran low, Basilone fought his way through enemy lines to retrieve more, making multiple trips while under constant fire. When gun crews were killed, he repaired damaged guns and manned them himself. When Japanese soldiers overran one position, Basilone killed them in hand-to-hand combat. When his machine gun jammed, he urinated on it to cool it down and keep firing. For 48 hours with little sleep, food or water, Basilone single-handedly held critical sections of the defensive line. By the time the Japanese attack was finally broken, Basilone and his section had killed an estimated 38 enemy soldiers. The next morning, dead Japanese soldiers were piled in front of his position. For this action, Basilone received the Medal of Honor and became a national hero. The Marine Corps sent him home for war bond tours, and he could have stayed in safety for the rest of the war. But Basilone requested to return to combat, saying he belonged with his men. In February 1945, Basilone landed with the first wave of Marines at Iwo Jima. Under withering fire on the black sand beaches, he led his machine gun platoon, personally destroying a Japanese blockhouse and guiding a tank through a minefield. Then, as he moved along the beach, directing his men, he was killed by a mortar blast. John Basilone had survived the hell of Guadalcanal, could have remained safe at home as a hero, but chose to return to the deadliest battle of the Pacific War because he believed his place was with his Marines. For his actions on Iwo Jima, he was posthumously awarded the Navy Cross. He was 27 years old. At number 3 is Hans Ulrich Rudel, the most decorated German serviceman of World War II, and arguably the most successful ground attack pilot in history. Rudel was a Stuka dive bomber pilot who flew an astonishing 2,530 combat missions, more than any pilot in history. His combat record is almost unbelievable. He destroyed 519 Soviet tanks, 1 battleship, 1 cruiser, 1 destroyer, 70 landing craft, over 800 vehicles, numerous bridges, and 150 artillery positions. He also shot down 9 enemy aircraft. No other pilot in any air force before or since comes close to this level of destruction. Rudel specialized in flying the Ju-87 Stuka, a dive bomber that by 1943 was considered obsolete and highly vulnerable, but in Rudel's hands it became a devastating tank killer. Flying on the Eastern Front, Rudel would dive almost vertically at Soviet armoured columns, releasing his bombs at the last possible moment and pulling up just above the ground, often flying through his own bomb fragments. His most famous achievement came in September 1941, when he sank the Soviet battleship Marat in Kronstadt harbour with a 200-pound bomb, penetrating the ship's magazine and causing a massive explosion. It was one of the most significant attacks by an individual aircraft in naval history. Rudel was shot down or forced to land 32 times, 30 times by anti-aircraft fire and twice by Soviet fighters. He was wounded 5 times, and in March 1945 his right leg was amputated below the knee after anti-aircraft fire nearly severed it. Incredibly, he returned to combat just 6 weeks later, flying with a prosthetic leg. He flew his last combat mission on May 8, 1945, the last day of the war in Europe, and then flew his squadron to surrender to American forces rather than the Soviets, knowing what fate awaited them in Soviet hands. Now, it's crucial to note, Rudel's courage and skill are undeniable, but he fought for Nazi Germany. Unlike some Wehrmacht soldiers who later claimed they were just following orders, Rudel remained an unrepentant Nazi until his death in 1982, which casts a dark shadow over his military achievements. We include him in this list purely for his extraordinary combat record and personal bravery in the face of danger, not for his ideology. His story reminds us that courage and skill can exist even in those fighting for the wrong side. At number 2 is Major Richard Winters, the leader of Easy Company, 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, 101st Airborne Division. Winters' story became famous through Stephen Ambrose's book and the HBO miniseries Band of Brothers, but his actual combat record is even more impressive than the dramatization. Winters was the embodiment of combat leadership, calm under fire, tactically brilliant, and deeply caring for his men. He led from the front in every engagement from D-Day to the war's end. His men would have followed him anywhere because they knew he would never ask them to do something he wouldn't do himself. Winters' defining moment came on D-Day, June 6, 1944. After parachuting into Normandy in darkness and gathering scattered troops, he learned that a German battery of 4 105 mm guns was shelling Utah Beach, where thousands of Americans were landing. The guns had to be silenced. With only 13 men, a fraction of the expected force, Winters led an assault on a fortified position defended by 50 German soldiers. Using textbook fire and maneuver tactics that are still taught at West Point today, Winters and his small force assaulted the position, destroyed the guns, killed 15 Germans, wounded many more, and captured maps of German positions in the area, all while suffering only 4 casualties. The assault at Brecourt Manor became one of the most studied small unit actions in military history. For this action, Winters was recommended for the Medal of Honor, though he ultimately received the Distinguished Service Cross. Throughout the war, Winters continued to display extraordinary courage and leadership. At Bastogne during the Battle of the Bulge, while Easy Company was surrounded and outnumbered, Winters kept his men alive through the coldest winter in decades. In the Netherlands, Germany, and Austria, his tactical brilliance and personal courage saved countless lives. What made Winters truly special wasn't just his bravery in combat, it was how he treated his men. He never asked for more than he gave. He shared their hardships knew each man by name, and made decisions that prioritized their survival without compromising the mission. After the war, his men stayed in touch with him until his death in 2011, a testament to the bond he forged in the fires of combat. Richard Winters proved that the greatest warriors are often the quietest, the most humble, and the ones who measure their success not in enemies killed, but in men brought home safely. At number 1 we have every soldier who fought. Because here's the truth, this list could have been 1,000 names long. For every decorated hero we've mentioned, there were thousands of ordinary soldiers who displayed extraordinary courage in moments no one recorded, on battlefields whose names are forgotten, in actions that received no medals. The Soviet soldier who threw himself on a German machine gun nest so his comrades could advance. The British sailor who stayed at his post on a sinking ship to give others time to escape. The American private who carried a wounded friend through enemy fire. The Chinese soldier who held a position alone against impossible odds. The French resistance fighter who faced the Gestapo's torture without breaking. The nurse who worked for days without rest in a field hospital under bombardment. World War II was humanity's greatest test, and over 60 million people died in it. But what we must remember, is that courage wasn't confined to generals and medal recipients. It was displayed every day by ordinary people thrust into extraordinary circumstances. The 19-year-old who stormed a beach knowing he probably wouldn't survive. The pilot who flew his crippled bomber away from a populated area before bailing out. The partisan who hid refugees knowing discovery meant death for everyone. The medic who ran into fire to save a life. The resistance fighter who passed messages knowing capture meant torture. These were farmers, teachers, factory workers, students, people who wanted nothing more than to go home to their families. They didn't consider themselves heroes. They were just doing what had to be done in the most terrible circumstances imaginable. So our number 1 spot goes to them, to all of them. Because the greatest act of bravery in World War II wasn't any single action by any single person. It was the collective courage of millions who stood against tyranny, who sacrificed everything for a future they might never see, who proved that when darkness falls, ordinary people can rise to become extraordinary. We remember the heroes whose names we know so that we never forget the millions whose names we don't. That's what true bravery is, not just facing danger, but doing what's right even when history won't remember your name.